President Trump addressing House Republicans, touting the military operation that took Venezuela's dancing dictator Nicolas Maduro from the palace in Caracas to Diddy's cellmate at Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center.
It was an amazing military feat that took place yesterday. Schumer, he's such a bad guy. I mean, I've known the guy for a long time, and he's such a bad guy. You know, at some point they should say, you know, you did a great job. Thank you. Congratulations. Wouldn't it be good? They've been after this guy for years and years and years. And, you know, he's a violent guy. He gets up there and he tries to imitate my dance a little bit. They have brand new, beautiful printed signs by like the highest quality printer. And you have a woman, free Maduro. And the sign is before we even did the attack. You know, free Maduro. We should all have quality signage like that. The one thing I want their sign maker. The guy is great.
President Trump laying out the rules of the road for Venezuela after warning its leaders to cooperate or risk getting another Delta Force courtesy wake-up call. Politico reports Trump has a list of demands for the interim president, Delcy Rodriguez. He wants them to crack down on drug flows, kick out Iranian, Cuban, and other operatives out of countries or networks hostile to Washington, stop the sale of oil to U.S. adversaries. They also expect Delcy to eventually facilitate free elections and step aside. Meanwhile, it looks like Jazzy Crockett and the ladies of The View are still in mourning at the arrest of Mad Dog Maduro.
Maduro is a bad guy. We took him out. So is Kim Jong-un. So is Putin. So is, or what's that other guy in Hungary? Are we going to go into all these countries and just kidnap their leaders?
The way he was removed from that country matters. We are supposed to be a nation of laws. The way we did it was against international criminal law. It's against the United Nations.
But guys, we've done this for 30 years. Somebody coming into the United States and grabbing our leader in the middle of the night and killing people in this country. I'm sure everybody would be outraged at them doing it that way.
All right, Dana, I don't think that's going to win her a Senate seat in Texas.
I know. I was just thinking of our constituents in Houston.
Right.
And actually, today, the polling is not necessarily reliable in the region, but Costa Rica, there's an 80% approval rating for the action. And as you mentioned yesterday, a lot of these governments have recently switched over from being very leftist to being more favorable towards the United States. And they're sick of the situations that they're dealing with. They don't all want to be narco-run. And so they maybe see a little bit of hope here. I'm not against America being the policeman of the world, but certainly the policeman of the hemisphere, I'm for it. I think it's fair to ask what's next. And Marco Rubio and the president have said, we're getting there. We've got a plan. I think that the unsung hero of a lot of this is John Ratcliffe at the CIA, who impressively stays out of the limelight. You never see him. He doesn't do an interview. He's secret squirrel over at the CIA. And they obviously had a very good approval rating after this because there was a 25% surge. That was reported by CNN today, supporting this. And why is that, Bill? I think that you have a successful operation that makes it look like peace through strength, America's in charge. And you know what? We're not going to take it anymore. There's number one. Number two, people learning more about Maduro and how he's a bad guy. By the way, Johnny at the beach last night, with all of these young people who thought Maduro was a place or a thing, it was very disturbing.
Well, before he went out, Johnny also thought Maduro was a place.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that. But the other thing is, it was something that President Trump was just saying there, is that the Democrats continue to look like lunatics because they were, under Biden-Harris, they were offering $25 million to capture Maduro. Here, we captured Maduro, and we don't have to pay the $25 million unless, as Greg says, you give it to the Delta Force.
Love it.
And it was a precision strike. So on the politics of it, okay, fine. It is fair to ask what the solutions are. The solutions are complicated. The problems are complicated, but at least there's movement.
A lot of action down south. Greg, the signage.
A lot of action down south.
How do they get the signage, Free Maduro, before the operation?
It's incredible. They're like half psychic, half sign makers. I want to get in on that. You know what's interesting about Trump? So he's not it confuses old minds. He's not a neocon, but he's not an isolationist. He's our first non-binary president ever. It's not like any other president, you know? There are no boxes for him. That's kind of a good thing, because when you think about it, weren't we all like that once? before we felt compelled to put ourselves in these labels of being, I'm a conservative. Like I was a liberal, then I was a conservative, then I was a libertarian. I thought I was an anarchist for a while. Then I thought I was a woodland creature until I got into therapy. Trump, he's not into forever wars, but he's also not into hibernation. He's just got one filter, and that is America first. And if you're going to pick any filter, it's not a bad one to have. I mean, to be a neocon, you have to be for exporting democracy no matter what. To be an isolationist, you have to be against doing anything but just staying home and, not and keeping your eyes closed. But he is like, you can't put him in a box, and that forces you to look at every independent action, outside of some high-minded principle. It's like, is this thing good for America? Does it allow for a clean exit? When he says we're taking the oil, we can go, wow, that's kind of brash. Yeah, but, it's honest. And is that good for America? Well, yeah, it was our oil. I mean, he not only staunched the flow of drugs, he also is getting our oil back. That's what I coined this phrase this morning: killing two birds with one stone.
Never heard that.
Write that down.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, write it down. Yeah. But you know what? Can you get that?
Got you.
Thank you. But it's like I'll finish on it. I think that Trump has always looked at ideology as narrowing choices. And he doesn't like narrow choices. It's like having one setting on your blow dryer, Jesse, or one setting on your neck massager, Dana. It's just like you want to be able to have the flexibility to do what you want, and that's how you live a life. You don't live a life, and so I think it's hard for a lot of people to figure this out because ideology and systems like that make you feel smarter. Because you don't have to think too hard. You just say, oh, this is what we do, and I know best, and I don't have to argue it. But he zigs and he zags.
But he has principle. The principle is America first.
The principle is America first, and it can look amoral to other people, but America first, we don't give an F.
How many settings do you have on your neck massager, Kennedy?
Well, it was sold to me as a neck massager, but it turns out it has a number of settings, which makes it a multi-tool player. So, thank you, Nabisco.
Nabisco?
The president's asking for a thank you. Do you think we're ever going to get a thank you from the opposing party?
We did from Debbie Wasserman Schultz on Saturday. So she was very enthusiastic because a lot of her constituents, not just Venezuelans, but there were Cuban Americans who had left their homeland to find freedom and riches in America. And they were also applauding their oppressed brothers and sisters. So she took that as a sign that she should also be applauding. And then, the virulent, angry people in her party turned to her and with the line they always use. And it's like, because Trump, this has to be bad. Because Trump, Maduro has to be good. If Trump hates him, then he must be a wonderful person and a comrade in arms. But if you look at the people who were oppressed under Maduro's leadership, why would they be celebrating if this were such an awful thing? So I think in the short term, you can find some positive aspects here. My problem as someone who does have an ideology and an operating principle, which is led by freedom, is that this could drag on into something that is incredibly expensive and, worst case scenario, a proxy war with Iran and China. I have more faith than some of my fellow libertarians do in Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio. What worries me is this president is going to be president for 3 years. What is happening in Venezuela will exceed his term. So, if the pendulum swings the other way and you have people who don't necessarily have an operating principle, who were moderate Democrats and now they're Mamdani cheerers, what are they going to do with Venezuela? And, the Hakeem Jeffries of the world who are, Chris Murphys, who are losing their spit over what happened in Venezuela, instead of saying, because Trump is bad, give us a solution. What would you do?
But how would that change this move, given what your concerns are about the future? How would that inform what you would do now? Would you try to do as much as you can whether it would be a Democrat
Okay,
or...
I would do as much as I can to bring about peace and prosperity. That is my operating principle. I would not do as much as I could militarily, because I think that is what gets people killed. It's what gets Americans killed, especially, people who have signed up with the better angels of their nature to serve in uniform for the United States, and to have those people killed. That's what breaks my heart. That's what I don't want to see. But if we can somehow turn this into stabilization, peace, and prosperity, I would love to see the president put forth a plan that says just that.
It's a lot. It's a lot to do. Please say Greenland again. I just want to...
Greenland. We must take over Greenland.
That sounds like a German.
Yes.
So I think...
Well, that's the move.
Kennedy's point is where the White House is now. Dana was touching on it. It's fair to ask what comes next. I think that the president clearly has a hemispheric focus. We've been talking around his table about how critical that is for a number of things. Foremost, we talked about it, helping to stem the flow of illegal immigration from some of these countries where there's not a lot of opportunities, not rule of law, and frankly, it's just dangerous. I think we give the president some time. I think this issue here deserves a transition period for him to be able to begin to articulate some of the things that, if not all the things that Kennedy mentioned. Because if we're going to get rule of law there, if we're going to get a decrease in drug flows there, or if not an altogether elimination, if we're going to get electoral and political integrity, it's going to take some time. But it's also going to take a president. I hate to repeat what I said yesterday, but I will. He had an opportunity today before the House Republicans to begin to lay out a vision, to begin to lay out what the plan's going to look like. I hope it, like Kennedy, I hope it does not involve a massive military presence. But if his plan needs that, we should know, as the American people, what it is he wants to accomplish intermediately there and long term. Because if long term we want peace and prosperity, that may cost a lot of money. Because it's not just going to be Venezuela we have to do it. They can't sit as an island. We would hope that it would serve as a template for the entire hemisphere. So I applaud his hemispheric focus. I don't know what the plan is. I don't know what the doctrine is. It can't be mess around with me and find out. That can be a consequence of the doctrine. But we need something fuller and, frankly, that explains better where we're headed as a country, militarily, economically, as it relates to our hemisphere.
Well, obviously, you missed prime time last night, because I explained it pretty well, Harold.
I watched you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.